Good day, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the third Full Circle virtual webinar talk. As many of you know, Full Circle is an event where we try and share information amongst the Wakefield supply chain. We're very proud to have cultivated some great relationships over the last 50 years. This event was supposed to be a physical event on Friday to coincide with our 50th anniversary birthday. But due to COVID, we had to cancel that. However, we decided to take Full Circle online. So thank you very much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about Café Femenino. So I'm going to pass you on to Priscilla Daniel, Senior Coffee Trader at DR Wakefield. She's going to introduce herself and introduce Connie, and then we're going to crack on with Connie's presentation. So thank you very much for joining, and I will see you soon. Over to you, Priscilla.
Hey, hello everyone. So like Henry said, I work at DR Wakefield, part of the trading team. And yeah, it is a pleasure to have Connie presenting the evolution of Café Femenino. DR Wakefield, we are Café Femenino agent in Europe since 2009. And we started actually to buy Café Femenino from Bolivia as a first origin, which we are still having on our offers, but the main one is Peru, that we are really in relationship with Connie and Victor and Isabel. So Connie, she's the director of Café Femenino, and I know her since the beginning. I started at DR Wakefield since 2010, and I had the chance to travel to Peru in Secano with her. So I'll let Connie to start and talk more about
Hello, Priscilla.
You can.
Okay, I'm just
to you, Connie.
Okay. Like Priscilla said, I'm Connie Kolosvary, Director of Café Femenino, and I am extremely honored to have been invited by our friends at DR Wakefield to present Café Femenino during this very exciting Full Circle event. We're not going to let a virus stop us, so we're going to proceed no matter what. A quick bit of information about myself. I have been working with Café Femenino since 2006, when I was brought on board to grow and strengthen the very new Café Femenino program. I live in Vancouver, Washington, not Vancouver, Canada, and not Washington, DC. Vancouver, Washington, which is kind of a suburb of Portland, Oregon, for those coffee people out there who might know Portland. It's on the west coast of the US, and I'm about 4 cups of coffee into my day so far, since it's 8 a.m. here on the west coast. I am a mom and a wife and an advocate for social justice, and I love almost everything about coffee. So that's me. Today I'm going to tell you about Café Femenino, how it began and how it has evolved through the past 18 years. To set the stage, I'll tell you a little bit about Organic Products Trading Company. It was Organic Products Trading Company with our partners in Peru, Secanor and Proasa, who came together to create this coffee brand and program. Organic Products Trading Company was started in 1990 as an importer of organic and fair trade coffees here in the United States. It's been working directly with small-scale farmers around the world to source and import high-quality green specialty coffee. Our business is built on long-term relationships with certified organic and fair trade cooperatives that focus on improving their communities, their families, and the environment. OPCO's mission is to support by providing market access, in addition to collaborating in development projects with the cooperatives, gender equity initiatives, harvest pre-finance, and quality improvement programs. And we have been a wholly owned subsidiary of Coffee Holding Company since 2010, after the original founders, Gay and Garth Smith, retired. So we can go to the second slide, please. So when your coffee stands for women, it stands apart. It's one thing we like to say. The concept of Café Femenino began with our long-term partners in Peru, as I mentioned before, and in conjunction with the coffee cooperative called Secanor and Proasa, which is their export arm. It was headed up by a wife and husband team, Isabel Uriarte La Torre and Victor Rojas. APCO has been partners with them since the early 90s, and by the time 2002 rolled around, it was very clear that the situation of the women farmers was no longer acceptable to all of us. By 2002, we had already had a 10-year working relationship with Secanor, so we were quite long-term partners by then. APCO was involved in several of the brainstorming sessions with the women of the cooperative. Many ideas began to bubble up to the surface. These ideas were very important concepts that could and would eventually lead to the Café Femenino concepts and eventual change. Secanor, together with APCO, created a set of specific standards and criteria under which the coffee would be produced. They also worked together to create a brand name, logo, and the whole program together. By 2003, Café Femenino was born. It was based on social justice and empowerment of women coffee producers. The Café Femenino now sources coffee. We took that idea from Peru. Why is my battery running low? Goodness gracious. One moment, please. I thought I fixed that earlier. So by 2003, we had taken this idea, by 2004, we'd taken this idea across to many other countries. Now it is in Bolivia, like Priscilla had mentioned. DR Wakefield is started there. We are also in Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, Nicaragua, Rwanda, and Sumatra. By 2004, Femenino landed on the shores of the United States. And then it was in 2009 that DR Wakefield began as our distribution partners in the UK and Europe. Since then, we have enjoyed a very successful partnership. And with their influence, we've been able to further reach the world in partnership with DR Wakefield. Slide 3, please. So let's talk a little bit about what was behind the need for Café Femenino. The living conditions, seeing a host of barriers, including poverty and generations of entrenched and unfair gender dynamics, we all work together to make Café Femenino what it is today. It gives women farmers direct compensation, political power, and the opportunity and resources to enact positive change in their community on their own terms. Before Café Femenino, the living conditions for women coffee producers in Peru were very, very difficult. They lived inside of a very traditional system where the men would take the coffee, cherries, or in parchment form to the buying station, collect the income from that coffee, and then the men would use that money for their entertainment first, and what was left over would make it back to the family. Not to say that they're bad guys, it's just the way it was. But as you can probably tell, it created this cycle of poverty that was difficult to break. So as you can see by this slide, where the women's work was usually field, to the picking and harvest, to the processing and sorting. And once it was time to transport into the buying stations, that was where the men would pick it up and sell it. We can go on to the next slide. What did Café Femenino do to kind of disrupt that traditional system? With Café Femenino, we knew that there were barriers that the women faced. And so for every barrier that they could think of, we put in some sort of requirement that would either overcome that barrier or launch women more forward into empowerment inside of their organization. We saw firsthand that if we created a framework that to support the entire supply chain, having all the components working together, that we could probably hopefully correct some of the inequities that were happening. And most of those were happening in three main areas, in economics, in participation, and in voice. I'll talk about each one important and what we did. The first one is economic empowerment. With Café Femenino, the first thing we did is we added a premium to the Café Femenino sales, so that 2 cents, a minimum of 2 cents, would be put on top of the organic and the fair trade premium. There would be a 2 cent premium on top of Café Femenino coffees, and that amount of money, even though it didn't seem like a lot, would be given directly to the women. And for the women, that was the first time in their lives in Peru that they had actual control of any money. When we first began, we did not want to take away what the men were used to receiving. We didn't want to ruffle too many feathers, so we left it the way it is, added more money to the top of it so that the women would have a bit of money. So when that happened, that was the thing that changed everything. For the first time, the women had money to make decisions with, and they were actually viewed differently inside of their organizations, inside of their families. The next thing was participation. What we saw was that the women were not given a space to participate. Many of them were married and their husbands were members of the cooperative. They would stay home and do the bulk of the work, and the husbands would go to the meetings, the cooperative meetings. And this was something that they were just not allowed to participate in. Many times we saw in Nicaragua, the women were not even allowed to gather in groups and in friendships without the permission to leave their house from their husbands. So participation was a really big thing. And the third thing was a voice. The women said that they felt invisible inside of their organization. Their voice didn't count. And you can see that when you are not a part of a membership of a cooperative, you don't come to the meetings. When that fair trade premium meeting to decide where that fair trade premium should go, there's only the men who are showing up to the meetings and making those decisions for where the money should go. And you're leaving out 50% of the population, and the women's priorities were not heard. So in those three areas, Café Femenino's framework made some changes. Let's see, slide 5, please. Because of the existing barriers that the women were facing in the supply chain, we created a model that would remove those barriers. Like I said before, it would make space for women, create pathways for their participation. It was a framework for social change. Because how do you disrupt a traditional economic system that keeps women in a marginalized status? that's why we had to make this program. You can provide, with this, you can provide an incentive for change. So the program involves these 4 items, these 4 sectors that are working together, and they all have standards and criteria and agreements that they work under. So we'll start with the cooperative partners. At that level, the cooperative partners and the coffee producers are having to work under the agreement that the women are doing the work, and if they're not doing the work, they're making the administrative decisions. If in some countries it's common that they hire help for the harvest, it is the woman who is making those decisions as well. We made sure that an additional premium is paid to the woman above the organic and fair trade price. A pathway for leadership is must be in place. Are we paused? We okay? All right. A pathway for leadership on the executive board. What we were seeing many times is the women were not being elected to the executive board and their voices were not heard. And with Café Femenino, we require that the cooperative partners make a pathway so that women have a way to be elected, or they create a space for women on the executive boards. We require that the women become full memberships of the cooperative, not a member through their husbands, and that they have full voting rights, just like their husbands. We require that they form a women's association that sits inside of the cooperative structure, and that they meet frequently whenever they decide to, but often, regularly, and that they vote who their leaders are going to be inside of their women's group. What we found out when the women started meeting, they started talking and solving a lot of their problems by sharing. It was just a really positive and powerful experience for many of them. On the cooperative level, we also require that the title of the land that they own with their husbands, that they have their names added to the title of the land. That protects them in the case that he leaves or dies. Also, it gives her the opportunity to have collateral for credit, which is also another problem in many third world countries, women having access to credit. We also require that the projects that the women came up with during their women's meetings and their associations, that they were driven by the women. They're not coming from the outside. They're not coming from us or anywhere else. We require inclusion and trainings. And then on top of that, constant reoccurring trainings in any areas that they felt important. The next layer is the roaster partners. When roasters decide that they want to be a part of the Café Femenino program, they sign an agreement that they are going to also adhere to certain requirements. They are, by buying the Café Femenino beans, they know that they're helping women across the world fight inequity and receive the credit that they deserve. We strongly encourage the roasters to use the name, logo, and tell the story about Café Femenino when they use the beans. They are required to donate to the Café Femenino Foundation. They cannot mix Café Femenino beans with any other beans other than Café Femenino. That is so that they can keep the integrity of the story intact. They cannot resell Café Femenino green to any other people. That way we have a nice, strong traceability. And then we also like to, we like them to promote gender equity ideas inside of their own businesses. But for the roasters, they like it because it comes with a very powerful, motivating story. It offers, we offer marketing and materials for them. We offer story updates about the origins. We also create kind of a direct relationship with the farmers through the opportunity for them to travel and meet the farmers. And they also like the knowledge that this coffee is ethically sourced. And for many roasters, that's really important for them. The next component is the customers. The customers, when they're connecting with their morning coffee, they're connecting with women across the world, fighting to empower themselves and their communities. Customers are increasingly seeking products that do more for the environment and social justice, is what we're seeing in many countries. The customers understand that they're empowering women through their buying decisions, and they want to increasingly know more about where their coffee is coming from, and they want to see results. They want to know about it. And with Café Femenino, they have that connection and that story that resonates with them. And then also another very important component to Café Femenino is our work with the Café Femenino Foundation. By 2004, the women's associations, like I said, have been meeting regularly, coming up with solutions to problems that they face through projects and programs. And it became clear that they would need funding for many of these incredible ideas, but where are they going to go and how are they going to get funding for them? The Café Femenino program, in conjunction with the foundation, well, the foundation was created in 2004 just for that very fact. The foundation is a tax 501(c), I think is what it's called. It is independently run, nonprofit, and it funds grants requested by the women, and it's committed to empowering women, their families, and their communities. Like I said, the projects have to come from the women. They do not come from the outside. These projects are women managed. They're wellness projects that include, they benefit the health, nutrition, sanitation, clean water, education, infrastructure, food security, all these different aspects that the women are requesting. The foundation president is Marilyn Drake, who is also attending this presentation somewhere out there in Vancouver. And she leads the board of 4 other members who are all volunteers. Shout out to her, to thank her for all the work she does with us. So the Café Femenino receives the donations from the roaster partners. That is 5 cents per pound donated to the Café Femenino Foundation, and that keeps those projects and that money kind of going in a circle back to the programs and the countries and the women's groups. Some roasters choose to do a minimum of 2.5 cents to the foundation minimum, and then the other 2.5 cents per pound to a women's crisis center in their community, so that they're also giving back to their community through Café Femenino. All right, so that's how all these pieces work together and hold each other accountable, and in this great big kind of circle. Okay, next slide, please. So here I wanted to talk about Café Femenino's impact. Now that you know why we created it the way we did, who does what, and how the structure is. Now let's talk about impacts. The funding of projects is a very powerful part of Café Femenino. Number one, it's because it's coming from the women's groups. And number two, they are putting into the hands of the women producers the ideas and the ability to administer and report back these very projects. We find and we have learned that by doing the thing, women learn empowerment. They learn leadership. They learn how to overcome obstacles. They learn that they can do a lot. And also the men see them in these capacities as the ones who are connected and who have resources. And so it works as a very important mechanism. mechanism. These projects that are funded through these projects are funded through the donations that come to the Café Femenino Foundation. There are two ways that that I kind of look at the empowerment piece. One of them is, oh, that's my dog, Jazzy. One of them is through the social projects that are funded by the foundation. Many of them are improving educational opportunities for their children that we're seeing. We're also seeing the women expecting their girls to have an equal opportunity to learn. We see them fighting malnutrition in their communities. We see improving health education and access to health resources. They are replacing stoves that lead to smoke inhalation in many of the communities by improved design and chimneys and having them raised off the floors. They are building libraries and schools. They are also asking for microloan funds for micro enterprises that they are putting in place within their women's groups. Oh my gosh, excuse me. You would think I'd have that figured out by now. Okay, they are also, we're seeing social impact when we are sourcing with a gender focus. We are seeing significant increases in the women's participation in the cooperatives. This gives the women voices that we haven't heard in the past, and their priorities are heard. We see increased numbers of women in leadership positions that we've never seen before. We've seen increased educational expectations that daughters finish high school that we didn't see before. We are seeing increased income and stability because of the increased income from Café Femenino that they're making. We see women becoming role models for their daughters. There are more educational training in areas that the women are asking for and prioritizing. We see incredibly improved self-esteem. This notion of having control of their program, and more control of their lives, and increased respect of the women in the family, as well as communication with their husbands. We see the men also impacted we see the increased participation of the men in child responsibilities. And we also see reduced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. One of the main reasons why Café Femenino was very important was the high level of physical, the domestic abuse and sexual abuse that was happening in Peru at the time. The World Health Organization had done a survey of the extremely impoverished areas, which is where the coffee is grown, and they were seeing upwards to 70% of women affected by domestic and sexual abuse, which was very unsettling. But we're seeing a very big reduction when women have a voice and are seen in higher status. Let's see, I could talk about several different case studies that we have done, but I'm only going to talk about two. The first one I want to talk about is one in Peru that we were seeing. They were seeing very high rates of malnutrition, and that is when the Food Security Initiative was implemented. They put together a workshop, 10 workshops, and which was funded by the Café Femenino Foundation, and it was an opportunity to put into place the idea that different nutritional items that were being grown on the farms could be implemented inside of their usual meal. They had been eating white rice for the feeling of full instead of actually the nutritional items that they had. So they began gardens and implementing quinoa gardens. And mostly this was over 10 regional organizations of about 800 women members in Peru. It led to the installation of family gardens to expand the types of products that they grew. The women learned to cook a variety of foods, including ancient grains native to the area, like quinoa and kiwicha. And they had an improved understanding of nutrition and a diversification of their abilities so that they could provide nutritional food. They also had a component of hand washing and sanitation and teaching them about how sanitation and just hand washing to reduce dysentery and those types of deals. The next one I want to talk about was a case study in Nahuala in Guatemala. When we first started there, we would have Café Femenino meetings and 2 women would show up and the rest were men. And they had a very difficult time making eye contact and they were extremely timid. There were several Café Femenino initiatives that were funded during that time by the foundation that were requested by the women. But it's not always easy for the women to find their voices after so long. But the women of Nahuala were able to get past their discomfort and their timidity. And eventually, when we would have meetings by 2 years later, we were seeing 40 women there in the cooperative. And then finally, now, this last time we were there, there was probably 145 women who showed up to the Café Femenino meeting. So it continues to grow. Right now, they have leadership programs where they administer biofertilizer programs. They're running training for parcel maintenance and inspections that are done by the women. They're also acting as promoters for the cooperative. So we have seen quite an arc with the women of Nahuala and Guatemala. So this all adds up to this type of program we see. It works. I can go to the final slide here. Last slide. It all adds up to ethical sourcing that's changing the world, changing the coffee world. Since 2002 to present time, over the past 18 years, we have seen what is now the development of what people call women's coffee. When we first started, there wasn't such thing as women's coffee. It was a new idea in 2003. And since then, we're proud that there's more focus on women and the work that women do. The women who have gone from having almost no control of their lives now have income and control. We see women being treated as partners by their partners. Men are embracing Café Femenino concept all over the place. Even if they're skeptical at first, within a year or one harvest cycle, we see that they understand the ideas behind it, and many of the husbands are signing their wives up even before the wives even come to a meeting. So we're seeing many allies with the men that just gives us so much hope and happiness, actually. We've seen the social inclusion, the betterment of working conditions. We have seen the pride of ownership and pride of belonging for the women. We've seen so many changes, but we have nothing but pride and admiration for the women coffee farmers who proudly call themselves Café Femenino. And with that, I thank you for listening to the presentation. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Connie, for the presentation. Really interesting. And I guess we could even like talk even longer. There is so many cases like about, you know, of the impact in Peru, but Guatemala, Bolivia, all of the different countries working with, as well as Colombia and so on. So I forgot to mention at the start, but actually for the one who are not maybe were not aware, you can ask question. You know, you have like a little corner end where you have a chat and you can ask question to Connie about the presentation or anything in relation with Café Femenino. So for the ones who didn't know about that, please feel free to ask those questions. And I will start then to answer a few of the questions that some of people already asked. So we have one from Francisco Boza. Is asking if there is any financial support for the environmental project, such as reforestation with Women Farmers Committee.
Reforestation projects, we have not received that I am aware of. I haven't seen all the projects, or Marilyn and I talk very often, and I'm not aware of any reforestation projects that the women have requested yet. I do know that there are reforestation projects going on inside of many of the cooperatives that we work with, one of them being Nahuatl in Guatemala. So yes, there are reforestation projects happening. We have not been involved in that because, again, it's coming from the women's groups.
And if okay, so yes, so there is, and it's something like can always come later since it's coming from the woman and the community. Okay.
I will say that we have, it's not reforestation, but it is renovations of coffee farms, and we will support and have through the past many times getting more coffee plants into the hands of the cooperative and the women's groups in that aspect.
And thanks for that. I have another question from Simon. Simon that you know, Connie, and that I know.
Hello,
Can the public consumer see the impact at origin for the coffees they buy?
Can you say that again?
Can the public consumer see the impact at origin for the coffees they buy?
We do take donors and we take roasters to take customers. Not to say that we wouldn't or couldn't, but the impact usually is something that the roaster will experience and see during their origin trip, and then they are the ones who usually tell the story to their consumers through their coffee and their website or the different kinds of workshops that maybe a roaster would have. We do have, for example, we took a group, String Bean, to Peru, and they put together kind of their own video. And when they came back to St. Louis, they did a complete Café Femenino presentation. They had an open house, they had kind of an event, and they showed the video, and they talked about it. I talked about it. We took answers. So the impact is something that is usually through the roaster, through DR Wakefield, through you guys, you know, for your customers. It's rare that we will take a customer.
Okay, good, thank you. And as well, like, you know, like you mentioned like earlier, all the impact, as well, the social impact and financial impact, and through all the evolution of Café Femenino, clearly, will you say there is like really all of those projects are changing through the years? If we say, for example, with Peru, you know, like 10 years ago, I guess, you know, the project that they were requested to be funded are different from the one today. So can you tell me more about the one that are recurrent, where there is always the same need, even through the evolution, or the new one where there is new needs?
Yes. Okay, so Peru is a good example. When we first started there, we had a very large grant that we funded a 2-year strengthening kind of grant. And it included things like self-esteem training, human rights training, how to use a calculator, how to use a public toilet at a hotel, because many of the women were coming into town to have meetings with us, and they requested these things. And so we started with a situation where they were very timid. They would not look you in the eye. They had very low self-esteem, and that's where it began. And they began working. And what we saw was the women were like sponges. If they were given the opportunity to learn something or come to an educational workshop, they did. Many of them school in the 2nd or 3rd grade. And so they were very aware of their lack of education, and they were also very unaware of their human rights. So we started there. Through time, we go back every year. So we're talking many, many years. Now you fast forward, and when we are meeting the women's group every year, they are walking in groups downtown together, going to restaurants, or not really going to restaurants, but they're out and about downtown. They're staying in hotels. They are now focusing in on some infrastructure, meaning they're putting more focus into their coffee farms and wet mills. They're also expanding into beekeeping. They're expanding into additional income opportunities, which is great, because if the coffee, we don't want them to have everything focused in on coffee. So I would say, long story long, they started out just unaware of having human rights and having very low self-esteem. And now we're talking about additional income and micro loans for micro enterprises, and wet mills, and things that you would imagine that the men were more interested in a long time ago. So they have learned and come so far.
Yes, good. Yeah, we can notice, like on our side as well, we feel a bit more like of the project linked with the coffees, and like you said, in terms of the process, and much more investment as well, like much more voice, so which is good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
On that point, we have another question actually from Damien Blackbird from Dark Foods. That's you know Damien as well. He's traveling.
Oh, hi. How are you?
So here is his question. Is there a mechanism to make a decision on what the social premium should be, and how can we ensure that they are increased over time?
Mm-hmm. That mechanism comes through conversations every year. That mechanism for Peru has increased. They get a higher premium. When it came to increasing that premium, we wanted to make sure that the women were the ones who got the increase and not the program, which is happening. So the women in Peru are getting an increased premium. The women of Guatemala are also getting an increased premium. Now in Mexico and Colombia, premiums. So when we started at 2 cents, that was just a starting point. Now some of them are all the way up to 10 cents premiums.
Okay, and how you identify, like, from, I guess because there is differences between countries,
Exactly.
from Peru and Guatemala, Colombia.
Exactly. Yeah, there is, and in some, honestly, some Café Femenino programs, for example, our Café Femenino program in Mexico started with Sesmach, and we have been working with them for many, many years. And they have become through time, they have become very sought after coffee. So they can, they can negotiate a higher premium. And because that coffee is sought after, it works. It's a market mechanism. There are other groups that are new and are unknown, and they start out, and as time goes on and they become more well-known, more sought after, those premiums go up for sure.
Thank you. I guess we can continue with some questions after, but I will think like it can be good to mention that, like we as well through the Full Circle webinar, we decided to make donation through any people participating to the webinar to one of the project of Café Femenino about the beekeeping project. So can you just tell a bit more about it to our attendees and a summary about this project?
It is, and this is something that the foundation manages this, the award, the requests and the funding. But I will tell you that what they're doing is they are placing beehives in and around the gardens and the coffee parcels, and they are receiving training on how to harvest the honey and to keep the bees healthy and become beekeepers. And so, and that's happening in Peru. The bees have been a project that has been ongoing in our Guatemala projects for, gosh, over 5 years. And also in Mexico, our Mexico program. They've been doing beekeeping for about 5 years now. But in Peru, this is going to be, and they have just had their inaugural bee boxes placed last year, and it's kind of exciting. I don't know very much about bees, but I do love honey, and it's giving them an additional income, nutritional aspect to their diets. They seem like they're very excited about learning this new thing. So we're excited to watch it evolve. What we do know is that when it starts with a couple farms, it starts growing, and pretty soon everybody wants one and everybody wants to learn, and it increases education and income stream. So that's what's really neat about it.
Yeah, thanks for the detail. We have still a bit more time and we have a bit more questions, so I'll continue.
Mm-hmm.
Is it from Amy at Mathewology? And she will be interested to hear more about how like you evaluate the impact of the approach.
Mm-hmm.
So especially about the foundation of the project,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you understand the impact of the premium paid directly to the woman, or on the impact increasing the participation in the meeting? So how do you look basically the approach on those impacts?
As far as
well, the last one is about the impact between the household dynamics, so relationship between husband and wife.
Okay, so all of those impacts we come to through different channels. As far as impact of income, that is straight away yearly women's meetings, talking to them telling us, and we can see the improvements that they are putting into their children. We immediately noticed that when women had control of some money, the first thing that they spent that money on was their kids. And we started seeing kids who didn't have shoes before with shoes. I know that's not scientific, but as a mom, that's a big deal. You know, we saw kids who had clothes that didn't have holes in them anymore. We saw their houses with improved surfaces, like they would be able to, instead of working off of dirt or wood, they'd be able to use tile, which is cleaner and healthier. So those are the kind of things that we started noticing. And just straight out them telling us that they're making more money than they have before Café Femenino, and that's straight from their mouths. Also, another channel is through third party. We have several people all the time contacting me who want to do studies on Café Femenino, and they want to do volunteering, or they want to write their thesis Café Femenino. And my answer is always be my guest, but when you're finished with your study, I want you to send us a copy so that we know what your findings are. And that's cool in that we are not the gatekeepers. They are free to go in. People are free to go in for themselves and see for themselves and talk to people themselves. We have had Root Capital come in and do a study with several cooperatives in Guatemala. Root Capital provides pre-financing to farmers cooperatives. And so they did a study with 5 different cooperatives, fair trade cooperatives in Guatemala. One of them was one where there was a Café Femenino program. In the end, I received a call from Root Capital because I didn't know this was going on. I received a call from Root Capital, and they said, okay, so we did this study. We found that the cooperative that had a Café Femenino program inside of it fared significantly higher and significantly better than the others. What the heck is Café Femenino? And that's when we were on phone calls after that. They wanted to know more about it. And then from there, they gave me that study. And from there, we went to Washington, D.C. to present it to the World Bank because they wanted to know how they could scale up this idea. So that was another channel that we've seen measurements. Measuring is hard because you're talking about people's lives and how it's better. You can measure money, an increase in money. We do have, when you look at how much money has flowed, that flows to Café Femenino farmers because of Café Femenino Premium, it's a lot. And also the amount of money that flows to the farmers and the women's groups because of the foundation, it's a lot. And you put that up against another cooperative without a Café Femenino program, and they're not receiving those same benefits. Let's see, as far as, what was the other kind of aspect of measurement? There was
between like the household, like wife and husband.
Oh yes, when we visit and we have meetings with the women's associations, they talk about their improved quality of communication with their husbands. We also have breakout meetings with the men because we want to hear from the men. This isn't just about changing women's lives, because when it all boils down, it's the men that are creating space for women inside of the organization was never there before. So the men are changing significantly. And I love it when we have the men who, you know, we want people to share their stories, but the men in the back they'll raise their hand and they'll tell their story about how they feel like Café Femenino has changed their family. And now, you know, they talk with their wife about the farm and what's going on and plans for how they're doing this business together. And the men are talking about how important it is that they support their children to go to university, including their daughters, which is new. For the last couple of years, I've heard that from several men, that they would say that it was never something that they would ever think about, supporting their daughters going to college. And I'm hearing that more and more because they see the value in women. And you have to remember, there's so many of these men who used to be little boys who grew up in homes where the dads left, or the dads were not maybe as wonderful as they could be. So these boys come to us and they say, how can we sign up? How can I sign my wife up? I'm like, well, she's the one who's got to sign.
So yeah, so it will be like positive in the future. You know, there is no much more of the, you know, need of the femenino, because it will be all, you know, more equal.
Yeah.
And we have just few minutes left, so I will have a last question so we can go through it quickly, but it's more about if Café Femenino is working. It's from Tom Bennett, sorry, I should say.
Hello, Tom.
And is Café Femenino working on a new area in different origin to expand the work? And yeah, if there is anything in the pipeline for Café Femenino Foundation and the Horizon. So
since I'm answering this question from Tom, I should give a shout out to AJ Bennett as well. They are our distribution partners in Australia and New Zealand. So between all of us, we've got the whole world covered. And so as far as new origins, we have done expansion in origins in the last 2 years. We have expanded our Mexico program to include another group, another cooperative, because there was huge demand. And we have expanded in Bolivia so that we could have more production and affect more women's lives in Bolivia. So those two are expansions. Our newest, which is not so new anymore, was Sumatra, and that was an incredible experience. We were really worried because at the time the original founders of OPCO had traveled to Sumatra in the 90s, and it was a very different place. And we were thinking to ourselves, we can't think of a better place for Café Femenino than Sumatra. And we were pleasantly surprised by the organization when we got there, that they had used the complete Café Femenino model to structure their fair trade cooperative around. So that was really a neat surprise when we got there. As far as new origins, we are always working to find new origins. We would love to have a reboot in Rwanda as well as Ethiopia, but we have to have the right partners. We would like to have a bigger footprint in Africa. We also are looking at Papua New Guinea. Again, we have to have the right partners, and we have been working in Honduras. So I hope that answers.
It's good. A lot of you know, perspective and good origin. You know, like we might have to, like we will work with in the future through Café Femenino. So thank you so much, Connie, for the presentation, all your time and detail about the evolution of Café Femenino, the answer to the question. Thank you everyone for asking the question. I will let Henry to tell you about the talk tomorrow for the next session of the Full Circle webinar.
And thank you to everybody, and thank you to you, DR Wakefield friends, Simon, Priscilla, Henry, and everybody. Thanks so much for caring.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Very interesting to hear you guys discuss the sustainability around Caf Femenino, how it's developing and what's on the horizon. Thank you to all the attendees. As Connie mentioned, all of the donations, which obviously any donation is welcome during these hard times, will be going to the beekeeping project, which is on the Café Femenino Foundation website, and it's also on our events page. If you're free, tomorrow we're going to be doing another presentation, which is to do with Costa Rican coffee production and how the pricing from farm gate to FOB works. So I think for those of you who don't know so much about Costa Rica, it's a fascinating origin, and some people say it is the benchmark for sustainability, both when we talk about environmental sustainability, social sustainability. It's a very interesting origin. So we've got Sebastian Lefay, who's the general manager of STC Coffees, who's going to join us. So hopefully we'll see some of you then. And for those of you that we don't see, we look forward to seeing you soon. So thank you very much, Priscilla. Thank you, Connie.
And thanks, Connie.
Thank you. Have a great day, you guys.
Likewise.
Bye.
Thank you.